Walking through the mall, a security guard approached me and said, "Ma'am, is this child yours?" I was about to say no, but the girl looked up at me with something frightened in her eyes. She gave the smallest nod and mouthed the words, "Say yes, please," while the guard wasn't looking. Something in her expression made me trust her without thinking twice. "Yes, this is my daughter." I pulled her into a hug and felt her trembling against me. The security guard looked unconvinced. He was a heavy-set man with a thick mustache who reminded me of Paul Blart. She was hiding in the dressing rooms for over an hour. Staff was worried. "I'm so sorry. We got separated and she must have panicked." I rubbed the girl's back, trying to seem natural. You know how kids get. He studied us both for a long moment. The girl pressed her face into my shoulder and I could feel her heart hammering against my chest. He finally nodded and walked off, though I noticed him speaking into his radio as he went. We didn't have long. The second he rounded the corner, I crouched down to her level. She had dirty blonde hair and a messy ponytail, and her Pokemon Eevee t-shirt had stains on it. Dark circles under her eyes made her look older than she probably was, and her eyes kept scanning the space around her like she was bracing for something. "Are you safe?" I asked quietly. She shook her head. "Someone took my mom and I'm scared they're going to take me too." My heart kicked hard, but I kept my expression steady. I took her hand and noticed how cold her fingers were. "Let's get somewhere with more people around, okay?" I led her to the food court where the lunch rush had packed every table, noise covering everything. I bought her a slice of pizza and a lemonade, then found us seats near the exit. She ate like she hadn't seen food in days. "Who took your mom? What did they look like?" I kept my voice gentle while my eyes moved across every face nearby. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "The man said he was a cop, but he wasn't a real cop. My mom knew something was wrong. How did she know?" I asked, watching a man in a maintenance uniform roll a garbage cart past us. The girl took a sip of lemonade, hands shaking slightly as she held the cup. She used to be a cop herself. She said his badge looked fake and his uniform was wrong. The shoulder patches were from a different county and his belt only had handcuffs. What happened after that? I noticed the same security guard from earlier now standing near the Panda Express watching us. We were shopping for my birthday when he walked up to us. My mom grabbed my hand really tight and started moving fast, but he followed. She pushed me into the changing room at JCPenney and told me, "That man is not a police officer. Do not let them grab you by any means." Then I heard yelling, and when I came out she was just gone. When did this happen? I was already reaching for my phone to dial 911. 3 days ago. She looked down at her pizza crust. 3 days. Where have you been sleeping? I tried to hide the shock in my voice. My mom's car. She showed me where she hides the spare key under the wheel well, but I ran out of the snacks she keeps in there yesterday. The girl's eyes filled with tears that she blinked back quickly, like she was accustomed to being the strong one. I was dialing 911 when she suddenly grabbed my arm, her small fingers digging in with surprising force. "He's here. The fake cop is here." My thumb froze over the call button. I looked around but saw only ordinary mall shoppers. Families with strollers eating orange chicken. Teenagers taking selfies near the fountain. A man in a suit checking his phone by the ATM. I don't see anyone in a police uniform. He changed clothes, but I know his face. He has a slight limp on his left side. And his shoes, my mom taught me to memorize details. Black dress shoes with a scuff on the right toe. She was nearly hyperventilating now. "Okay, we're going to walk calmly to the bathroom and figure out what to do from there." I abandoned the 911 call for the moment and took her hand. We stood, moving slowly, trying to look casual. The girl stayed pressed close to my side, using me as a barrier between herself and whoever she'd spotted. The food court felt enormous now, every face suddenly suspicious. We passed the Chinese food counter, and I was working to stay calm when she tugged my hand sharply near the hallway leading to the bathrooms. "That's him, the man in the blue jacket by Subway." She whispered it without looking. I glanced over and my blood turned cold. I recognized that profile without any question at all. "No, that can't be. Are you absolutely sure?" My voice came out strangled. The girl peeked around me, then ducked back again. "That's him. He's the one who took my mom. He had a partner too, a woman, but I never saw her face." My mind was racing. A woman? Because that man was my husband. My whole body went cold and I gripped the girl's hand tighter, pulling her through the bathroom door. The heavy door swung shut behind us and I steered her into the largest stall at the end, hands trembling so badly I could barely work the lock. The girl pressed herself flat against the wall and watched me with those wide, scared eyes while I tried to make sense of what I'd just witnessed. My husband was out there in the food court, and this child was telling me he'd kidnapped her mother 3 days ago. I pulled out my phone and typed a message, trying to keep my fingers from shaking. "Hey babe, where are you?" The 3 dots appeared almost instantly. "At work dealing with inventory, why?" My stomach turned. I'd just seen him standing by the subway in his blue jacket, the one he only wore on weekends. The girl tugged my sleeve and whispered we needed to get out right now because he might have spotted us. I cracked the stall door and peeked out into the empty bathroom, then eased the main door open to check the hallway. The security guard from earlier was heading toward the food court with his radio raised. I pulled back fast. We couldn't go that way, and the girl was starting to shake again. I spotted a side exit near the family restroom that led to a service corridor and grabbed her hand. We slipped through quickly and found ourselves in a white hallway that smelled of cleaning products, arrows pointing toward the parking garage. My sneakers squeaked on the waxed floor as we half-jogged past storage rooms and employee break areas. The girl stayed right with me, glancing back over her shoulder every few steps. We pushed through another heavy door and came out in the parking garage, the smell of exhaust and oil washing over us. I couldn't remember where I'd parked and started clicking my key fob while we moved between rows. Finally, my Honda beeped 2 rows over and we hurried to it. The girl climbed into the passenger seat and immediately ducked below the window line while I started the engine with unsteady hands. I sat there a moment deciding whether to call 911 immediately or get somewhere safer first. The girl must have felt my hesitation, because she looked up at me and said her mom had always taught her not to trust anyone in uniform unless you were absolutely certain they were real officers. She said it quietly but with conviction, like something repeated many times, which made sense given what had happened to her mother. My husband had mentioned cop friends before, people I'd never met, and now that detail felt pointed. I decided we needed more information before bringing in anyone official. I put the car in reverse and started backing out. The girl sat up slightly and mentioned that her mom's car was still somewhere in the mall lot with important things inside. She knew exactly which section because she'd been living in it for 3 days and had memorized every landmark nearby. I drove slowly through the garage and out into daylight. We circled around to the far side of the mall near the old Sears entrance that had been shuttered for years. The girl pointed to a faded gray Honda Civic with a cracked windshield parked under a broken light pole. She had me park a few spaces away so we wouldn't be obvious, then showed me exactly where her mom hid the spare key, a magnetic one tucked inside the rear wheel well, covered in road grime and rust. The girl knew right where to reach and pulled it free, like she'd done it before. The car interior smelled stale with empty granola bar wrappers and juice boxes scattered across the back seat. The girl went straight for the glove compartment and pulled out a manila folder wedged behind the owner's manual. Inside was her mother's old police badge from when she'd worked for the county sheriff's department 5 years earlier. Alongside it were photocopied case files about missing persons and fraud investigations, plus a gas station receipt with a partial license plate number scratched on it in pen. The girl explained her mom had been looking into something on her own time before this happened. She'd overheard phone calls about people impersonating officers and taking individuals who owed money or had warrants. The receipt was from the day before they were grabbed, and her mom must have noticed something suspicious. I photographed everything with my phone, then returned the folder to its spot. We locked the car and replaced the key in its hiding place in case it was needed again. Back in my own car, I finally accepted we needed actual police involvement, despite the risk of my husband having connections there. I called 911, and when the operator answered, I focused on keeping my voice even while explaining I had a child whose mother had been abducted 3 days prior. The operator asked several questions about our location and whether we were currently safe. She told us to come directly to the main precinct downtown and said she'd alert the desk sergeant we were on our way. The drive took 20 minutes, and the girl stayed quiet the entire time, staring out the window. The police station was an old brick building, with narrow windows and metal detectors at the entrance. Inside smelled like coffee and floor wax. People sat on benches looking weary and impatient. I explained to the desk officer why we were there, and he made a call, then directed us down the hall to a conference room. A woman in a suit came in and introduced herself as someone who worked with child victims. She took the girl to a separate room to speak privately, while a detective came to collect my statement. I explained finding the girl at the mall and what she'd told me about the man impersonating a police officer who took her mom. I described seeing a suspicious figure, but held back the detail about recognizing him as my husband. I needed to think through how to handle that part. The detective noted everything down and said they'd pull mall security footage to identify the suspect while the specialist worked with the girl for more details. About 20 minutes later, a tall man in a gray suit walked in carrying a thick folder and introduced himself as Detective Jamal Griffith. There was a quiet steadiness about him that made me think he'd seen a great deal of terrible things and still chosen to care about fixing them. He sat across from me, opened the folder, and had me walk through everything from the beginning, taking notes on a yellow legal pad as I went. When I reached the part about seeing the man in the food court, his pen went still and he looked up. He asked specific questions about height, build, and the exact position where I'd spotted him. I described the blue jacket, the limp, the way the girl had recognized him immediately. He pulled out a tablet and showed me still images from different mall cameras. The photos were grainy, but faces were discernible if you studied them. He had me point out where we'd been sitting and which direction the man had been facing. While we went through the images, a woman in a blazer knocked and entered, introducing herself as being from Child Protective Services. She began talking about emergency foster placement and paperwork requiring immediate processing. My stomach dropped at the thought of the girl being handed to strangers after everything she'd endured. I told the CPS worker that the girl deserved some say in what happened to her, given how smart and composed she'd been through all of this. The woman looked annoyed and cited protocol, but Detective Griffith backed me up. He said the girl had shown exceptional judgment and ought to have her preferences heard. The CPS worker stepped out to speak with the girl and returned 10 minutes later with her edges slightly softened. She said the girl had asked whether she could reach me later and wanted me included in the process. Detective Griffith helped establish an approved contact arrangement between us and gave me a direct number to use. The CPS worker agreed I could be listed as a support person throughout the placement. She had me complete background check forms and emergency contact paperwork. Detective Griffith returned to the mall camera images and asked whether anyone stood out as familiar or suspicious. He had dozens of pictures from various days organized in a binder. I was working through them when the girl came back into the room with the specialist. She stood beside me and started looking through the photos too. Then she pointed to one image and my whole body seized. It was a profile shot of my husband walking past the orange Julius stand 3 days prior. The timestamp read 2:47 p.m. precisely when the girl said her mother had been taken. My hands started shaking and I couldn't get air properly. Detective Griffith noticed my reaction and asked if I recognized someone. Before I could respond, my phone began ringing and my husband's name filled the screen. His timing had always been uncanny like that, calling exactly when I was thinking about him. I answered and tried to sound normal while everyone in the room watched. He asked where I was, and that particular edge in his voice was present, the one he used when he was checking up on me. I told him I was still at Nordstrom searching for a birthday gift for my sister. He said I'd been gone a long time and asked which Nordstrom. I said the downtown location. He asked what I'd picked up so far. I invented something about browsing purses without finding the right one. He pushed for specifics: what color, what brand, the price. His voice hardened when I stayed vague, and he mentioned he'd driven past the mall earlier and hadn't seen my car. I said I'd parked by Macy's because it was less crowded over there. He went quiet briefly, then said I'd better not be lying to him. After I hung up, my hands were trembling so badly I dropped the phone. Detective Griffith retrieved it and looked at me with a calm, knowing expression. I took a breath and told him the man in the photo might be my husband. He didn't flinch or judge me. He simply began asking practical questions. Full name, date of birth, employer. He asked about our vehicles and whether my husband had any law enforcement training or connections. I told him my husband had worked security at various places over the years but never stayed anywhere long. Detective Griffith placed a call requesting mall security footage from both today and 3 days earlier, every angle covering the food court and surrounding stores. Within an hour, they had a laptop showing multiple camera feeds. We watched my husband moving through the mall 3 days ago with that slight drag on his left side. His black dress shoes appeared in one shot with the scuff clearly visible on the right toe. The footage from today showed him in the blue jacket crossing the food court right when we'd been there. Detective Griffith pointed out how my husband kept checking exits and studying people like he was tracking targets. An officer came in and whispered something to the detective, who nodded gravely. He told me they'd had an unmarked car parked outside the station for the past 20 minutes on routine surveillance. That car had just radioed in that my husband's truck was circling the block slowly, as though searching for something. When the driver noticed the surveillance unit, he accelerated and left. Detective Griffith said this confirmed my husband was watching for me and likely knew I'd come here. He made several calls and within the hour had arranged for me to stay somewhere safe, an extended stay hotel, the department used for witnesses needing protection. He had tech specialists mirror my phone so that every call and message from my husband would be tracked and recorded. They gave me a different device for personal use and instructed me to keep my regular phone powered on and charged. They needed my husband to believe everything was normal while they assembled their case. That night, sitting in the hotel room, the new phone rang. It was the girl calling from her emergency foster placement. She sounded frightened but said the family seemed decent and had given her her own room with a working lock. She said more details kept coming back to her about where they'd taken her mother. There was a specific smell she remembered, rubber mixed with bleach, like a hospital but different. She thought it might be a storage facility or warehouse because she'd heard metal doors slamming repeatedly. I wrote down everything she described about the smell and the doors, and Detective Griffith acted immediately, applying for a search warrant for my house. 2 hours later, while my husband was still at work, 6 officers arrived with paperwork. They went through every room, pulling things from closets, checking behind furniture. One officer found a prepaid phone taped under our bedroom dresser, something I'd never known existed. The call history showed dozens of contacts with storage facilities on the outskirts of town over the past month. My regular phone buzzed with a text from my husband asking where I was and telling me to come home right away. He said I was making something out of nothing. His next message said he knew I'd been to the police station because a coworker had spotted my car there. He kept texting that we needed to talk, that I was being paranoid and unstable, the way I always got. The officers photographed everything, including the texts, while I sat on my couch watching strangers work through my life. Detective Griffith arrived and asked about our finances while the search continued. I described the money problem since my husband had lost his previous job 6 months earlier. I mentioned finding a shoebox of cash in the garage the week before, which he'd said came from selling tools. The detective wrote everything down and said desperate people take desperate measures. He asked again about law enforcement or security connections. I recalled him temping at various security firms over the years, never lasting anywhere. The foster family called that afternoon to say the girl was okay but having bad dreams about her mother. She'd woken up screaming twice and kept asking if I was safe. Detective Griffith helped arrange for me to visit her the next day and bring some belongings from her mother's car. I drove back to the mall lot to find the Honda still there with a police seal on it. An officer met me and allowed me to take a stuffed bear and a blanket from the back seat. The next morning, I went to the foster home, a small house with a swing set in the yard. The girl ran to me when I walked in and held on for a long time. I gave her the bear and blanket and she pressed them against her face, breathing in whatever smell of home was still in them. We sat on the couch and she started remembering more details about the day her mother was taken. She recalled driving past a water tower with a smiley face painted on it just before they stopped. She said the fake officer's car was already waiting when they pulled into what appeared to be an old industrial area. This helped the police narrow things down considerably, since only one water tower matching that description existed in town. Detective Griffith called me that night to say they'd searched 3 storage sites near that water tower. At one location, they found zip ties and rope, along with a receipt that had slipped behind some boxes. The receipt had a woman's name I didn't recognize, Sophia something, and was for cleaning supplies purchased 2 weeks earlier. Traffic camera footage showed my husband's truck at those same storage units 2 nights before the kidnapping. The timeline was sharpening, and the evidence against him was accumulating steadily. I returned to the mother's car the following day with permission to look for anything else useful. Under the driver's seat was a notebook filled with dates and locations in neat handwriting. The notes described other fake officer incidents across 3 nearby counties over the past year. Each case involved someone approaching women with children, claiming to be police but with wrong uniforms or badges. Detective Griffith ran the information and found matching reports on file, none with arrests. He also discovered my husband had temped for the company that managed mall security contracts. Work records showed he'd been assigned to our mall twice, which explained how he knew the blind spots, where every camera was, which areas staff rarely checked. The girl completed another recorded interview at the station with a child specialist present. More details about the woman who'd accompanied the fake officer surfaced. She'd had a crescent moon tattoo on her wrist that the girl noticed when the woman grabbed her arm. She also remembered the woman had written something down with her left hand, which had struck her as unusual. Both details were added to the growing case file. My husband kept calling and texting, but I followed the detective's instructions and let everything go to voicemail. His messages escalated from rage to apology and back, saying he loved me, that none of this was what it looked like. The police said that pattern was consistent with someone who understood the walls were closing in. I spent another night at the hotel barely sleeping, turning over all the moments I'd missed. The next morning, Detective Griffith called to say they had sufficient evidence to arrest my husband. They planned to pick him up at his workplace that afternoon to minimize complications. The thought of what our neighbors would say when the news spread made me feel ill. The detective said to brace myself, this would likely make the local news. I went back to the hotel room and started going through my husband's data on our shared cloud account. His photos synced automatically, and I scrolled through hundreds of ordinary work pictures until something odd appeared. Photos from a bar, dated 3 weeks back, with a woman I'd never seen before. Dark hair pulled back, laughing at something my husband was saying. In one image, she was holding a drink and her left wrist was clearly visible. The crescent moon tattoo was right there, exactly as the girl had described. My hands shook as I screenshotted everything and sent it to Detective Griffith's email. He called back within minutes and said they'd identified her through DMV records as Sophia Greer. Police obtained a warrant for her apartment that same night, but she was already gone when they arrived. The landlord let them in to find the place stripped of most belongings, only furniture and trash remaining. Neighbors reported seeing her loading boxes into a white van at 3 in the morning 2 days earlier. One neighbor remembered a dent in the rear bumper and a community college parking sticker. Detective Griffith called me the next morning to warn me my husband might attempt to come home. Officers were watching the house. Sure enough, around noon, he pulled into the driveway in his truck. The moment he registered the unmarked vehicles, he threw it into reverse and sped off down the street. Officers pursued on foot when he abandoned the truck and fled through the Johnson family's backyard. He cleared their fence and disappeared into the woods behind the neighborhood. They searched for hours with dogs, but he knew those woods from years of running trails through them. Footprints led to the creek and disappeared. Detective Griffith said I couldn't stay at the hotel anymore since my husband likely knew about it. They relocated me to a different safe house across town that afternoon. I packed my few things into garbage bags and left everything else behind. The new place was a small apartment above a dry cleaner with bars on the windows. The isolation hit me the first night, the understanding that I couldn't call anyone or go anywhere. I knew it was necessary, but the loneliness pressed down hard. 2 days later, the Financial Crimes Unit called with findings from my husband's bank records. They'd found deposits from 3 different companies that were fronts for illegal skip tracing operations. Not real bounty hunters, criminals seizing people for money with no legal authority. The payment stretched back 18 months and totaled over $40,000. He'd been doing this for more than a year while I believed he was putting in overtime at his regular job. The girl called me that night from her placement, crying so hard she could barely form words. Her foster mother got on the line and said she'd been having nightmares, screaming herself awake twice. I talked to the girl and had her count to 10 slowly while breathing through it. We worked through the exercises her mother had taught her until the crying tapered. She kept saying she missed her mom and wanted to go home. I stayed on the phone for an hour until she finally drifted off. Her foster mom thanked me and said the girl had been asking about me every single day. 3 days after that, Detective Griffith called with news about Sophia's vehicle. It had been found abandoned in a downtown parking garage with the plates stripped. The forensics team found blood on the passenger seat matching the mother's DNA from her medical records. The volume suggested injury rather than fatality. Zip ties were in the trunk, and a roll of duct tape was found under the seat. The garage cameras had all been spray painted over. Detective Griffith came to the safe house that afternoon to review everything assembled so far. I finally told him the full truth about the mall that I'd recognized my husband the instant the girl pointed him out, but my brain had refused to accept it. The detective said denial was completely normal when someone you love is revealed as dangerous. He'd encountered it hundreds of times. He asked if I'd be willing to help them draw my husband out, since he might still attempt contact. The plan would be a public meeting with backup spread throughout the area. I was scared but said yes, because I needed this to end. They would wire me and position officers everywhere. My husband was growing desperate based on his messages and might miscalculate. The detective promised nothing would happen to me. The next day, a victim advocate arrived to walk me through my rights and confirm I understood exactly what I was agreeing to. She was an older woman with steady, kind eyes who had spent 20 years working with crime victims. She asked whether I felt pressured to participate, and I told her I wanted to help. We went over safety protocols and signals I could use if something felt wrong. She gave me her cell number and said I could back out at any point. No one would blame me for that. That night my phone buzzed with a voice message from the girl. When I played it, her small voice filled the empty apartment, saying she was proud of me for helping catch the bad man. She said her foster mom had helped her record it and she wanted me to know I was brave, the way her mother had always taught her to be. Those words made my chest ache and I played the message 3 more times, sitting on my kitchen floor crying, because this child who'd been through so much was trying to give me strength. The next morning, Detective Griffith called to confirm they were ready to set up the meeting and asked whether I was still willing. My hands shook as I said yes. He explained unmarked cars would be positioned all around the park, with additional officers dressed as joggers and people walking dogs. He suggested I text my husband that I wanted to discuss our marriage and ask if he'd meet me at Riverside Park near the playground where we used to go early in our relationship. I sent the message with fingers that had to retype it twice, and within 5 minutes he replied agreeing to 2 o'clock, said we'd work everything out. The detective came to the safe house to place a tiny microphone beneath my shirt collar and showed me the signal for if things went wrong, touching my left ear twice. 2 officers drove me to the park in an unmarked car and dropped me off a block away so I could approach looking natural. The playground was busy with kids on swings and parents on benches, which steadied me knowing witnesses and officers were everywhere. I sat on the bench where we'd carved our initials 5 years earlier and focused on breathing while watching a woman push her toddler in the swings. My husband showed up 10 minutes late, limping noticeably worse than before, clothes rumpled like he'd been sleeping in his vehicle. He sat down, leaving space between us, and immediately launched into a story about Sophia forcing his participation by threatening to hurt me if he didn't help her grab people for cash. His account kept shifting. First he only drove, then he admitted helping restrain people, but insisted he'd never seriously hurt anyone. I asked about the girl's mother. He glanced around before leaning in and whispering that she was still alive, but only he knew exactly where. He claimed he'd been bringing her food and water, but that she needed medical attention, and he'd only reveal the location in exchange for a reduced sentence. The detective's voice came through my earpiece, instructing me to keep him talking. I asked why he'd done any of this, and he grabbed my wrist saying we needed the money, IVF treatments, a bigger house. His grip hurt. I saw 2 joggers redirect toward us, but then he released me and stood abruptly, said he knew I was wired because I'd kept touching my collar. He ran, but the bad leg slowed him immediately, and within seconds 3 officers brought him to the ground right in front of the playground. Parents grabbed their children and backed away. Officers cuffed him while he shouted that the mother would die without a deal, but Detective Griffith simply read him his rights and had him loaded into a patrol car. Back at the station, his lawyer appeared within an hour, demanding private consultation before any questioning. The detective paced the hallway, watching his watch because every minute mattered for finding the mother alive. After 3 hours of negotiation, the lawyer emerged and said his client would disclose the location in exchange for dropping the kidnapping charge to unlawful imprisonment. The prosecutor argued for 2 more hours while I sat in the victim services room drinking cold coffee, thinking about a woman bound somewhere in the dark. Finally, they reached terms 12 years instead of 25 if the mother was found alive, and he testified against Sophia and the others in the network. The deal nauseated me, but Detective Griffith explained it was the only path to dismantling the entire operation and protecting future victims. My husband gave them an address, a storage unit off Highway 87 near the industrial district, and within minutes every available unit screamed toward it. The facility manager met them with bolt cutters, and they found the mother in Unit 447. secured to a metal chair with duct tape over her mouth and zip ties at her wrists and ankles. She was conscious but severely weakened from dehydration. Paramedics started an IV immediately while assessing her vitals and rushed her to the hospital with Detective Griffith following to take her statement the moment doctors cleared it. The girl was brought to the hospital with her foster mother and a counselor for the reunion. The mother was hooked up to monitors but awake and crying. They held each other for 20 minutes without saying anything, while the medical team checked both of them for injuries requiring immediate intervention. The mother kept touching her daughter's face as though she couldn't fully believe she was real, and the girl wouldn't release her mother's hand even when a nurse needed to adjust the IV line. Meanwhile, the detective received word that Sophia's credit card had been used at a gas station 2 states over, and traffic cameras had caught her car heading toward the border. The investigation revealed she was part of a larger network of fake officers, operating illegal bounty hunting schemes across 5 states over the past 3 years. That night, the local news ran the story alongside my husband's mugshot, and suddenly my phone exploded with calls and texts from journalists wanting statements. By morning, someone had posted my photo and home address online, claiming I must have been aware of what my husband was doing and belonged in a cell alongside him. The harassment became so severe, people calling me a kidnapper's accomplice, sending threats that I deleted every social media account and changed my phone number entirely. The following morning, I went straight to the courthouse with all the bank statements I'd gathered and filed for divorce on grounds of immediate danger and criminal conduct. The clerk handed me forms for a restraining order too, and I completed them right there in the lobby, hands still unsteady from everything. Within 2 hours, a judge had signed the emergency order barring my husband from coming within 500 feet of me or making any contact. The court also froze our joint accounts pending investigation into the illegal funds, which meant I couldn't access our savings, but neither could he. 3 days later, my husband's lawyer contacted the prosecutor's office indicating his client wanted to make a deal, offering up everyone involved in exchange for reduced charges. The prosecutor told me they spent 6 hours going back and forth on terms while my husband sat there in his orange jumpsuit looking like a smaller version of the person I'd once known. He agreed to testify against Sophia and 12 other individuals in the fake cop network in exchange for a reduction from 25 years to 15, with parole eligibility at 10. The deal sickened me, but Detective Griffith explained it was the only way to bring down the entire operation and help other victims who had no idea what was coming for them. Meanwhile, the mother faced her own complications as the department opened an internal review of her prior cases following her time on the force. She sat through hours of questioning about whether she'd encountered signs of this criminal network during her years of service. Investigators combed every arrest and report she'd filed looking for connections, but she cooperated completely and answered everything asked of her. All she wanted was to focus on recovering and being present for her daughter, who needed her more than ever. Social services ultimately approved the girl to return home with her mother under strict supervision, weekly check-ins, and mandatory therapy sessions. They moved into a smaller apartment near the hospital where the mother could continue physical therapy for injuries sustained from being restrained so long. The girl helped her mother with exercises every morning before school, and they began attending family counseling twice a week to work through the trauma. The counselor taught them breathing techniques and grounding exercises for when the memories overwhelmed them, which happened frequently in those early weeks. 5 weeks after everything started, police received a tip that Sophia was at a Greyhound station attempting to buy a ticket to Mexico under a false identity. Security cameras caught her in a wig and sunglasses, but the crescent tattoo on her wrist gave her away when she handed over cash. Police surrounded the bus just as she was boarding and found 3 fake IDs on her along with $8,000 in rubber-banded cash. She fought back and tried to run, but they took her down on the platform while other passengers filmed everything. The preliminary hearing started 2 months later. I had to testify about everything I'd witnessed and learned, which meant seeing my husband across a courtroom for the first time since his arrest. I wore my most professional clothes and kept my voice level even when his lawyer attempted to make me look deceptive about not knowing anything. My husband, that word felt wrong by now since he'd lost weight in jail and kept trying to catch my eye, sat with his hands folded on the table. I told the court about the cash in our garage, spotting him at the mall with the girl, how he'd lied about being at work that day. The prosecutor presented security footage and phone records supporting everything I said while my husband stared at the table surface. After my testimony, I was walking to the parking garage when his mother grabbed my arm and begged me to visit him in jail. I kept walking. Then his voice reached me from where guards were moving him back toward holding. He said he was sorry, that none of this was ever supposed to go this far, but his apology was entirely about how this situation had affected him, his debts, his fear, the way Sophia had manipulated him. Not a single word about the mother tied to a chair in that storage unit. Nothing about the little girl surviving alone in a car for 3 days. I turned away from him and kept walking while he kept calling after me until the doors cut him off. Sophia's preliminary hearing the following week featured a far more combative defense. Her lawyer challenged the storage unit receipt as potentially planted and argued the witness identifications were unreliable given the trauma involved. The judge dismissed 2 of the minor charges for insufficient direct evidence but held the kidnapping and conspiracy counts, which could still carry 20 years. Sophia sat through all of it completely expressionless, as though the entire proceeding had nothing to do with her, which made me angrier than I knew how to say. After all the court proceedings, I finally began seeing a therapist, because the insomnia and panic attacks had become impossible to manage. I couldn't sleep and kept startling at the sight of men who resembled my husband in any way. The therapist's office had soft lighting and a white noise machine running outside the door, but I still felt exposed talking about how completely I'd failed to see who I'd actually married. Some nights I'd wake at 3 in the morning convinced I heard him trying to get inside, even knowing he was locked up. The therapist taught me to write when I couldn't sleep, and gradually the nightmares grew less frequent, though they never entirely disappeared. The girl returned to school about a month after reuniting with her mother, but adjusting to ordinary routines proved genuinely difficult. Loud sounds made her panic, and crowded hallways between classes overwhelmed her, so the school allowed her to leave 5 minutes early. Her teacher told me she was applying the coping skills from therapy counting, focusing on her breathing when things got to be too much. She even started building a friendship with a quiet girl who sat with her at lunch and didn't press for details when she occasionally had to step away suddenly. Detective Griffith called me one afternoon while I was packing up the bedroom to say the girl's mother needed employment. He knew someone at a downtown security company that was hiring for desk work and wondered if I could drive her to the interview, since she still didn't have a vehicle. I picked her up the next morning. She wore the only nice thing she had left, a black blazer that hung loose on her frame after everything she'd been through. The security company occupied an unassuming office near the courthouse, and the manager was cordial when they shook hands. She got the position that same day part-time at minimum wage, but it was a beginning. 2 weeks later, the divorce papers finally arrived, and I signed them at my kitchen table without falling apart. The apartment I found across town was half the size of the house we'd shared, but the rent was manageable and the neighbors minded their own business. I put our wedding photos in a cardboard box and pushed it to the back of the closet where I wouldn't come across them by accident. The china from our wedding registry went to Goodwill along with the matching towels and the throw pillows he'd picked out. Moving day came and I loaded everything into a rental truck alone, not wanting anyone's sympathy or assistance. The new place smelled of fresh paint and had water stains on the ceiling, but it was mine and only mine. 3 months after everything happened, an envelope arrived at my new address in the girl's handwriting. Inside was an invitation to her birthday party, the one they'd been shopping for when everything went wrong. The party was at a park near their new apartment with only 5 children attending, but everyone was genuinely present and happy. The girl wore a new Pokemon shirt and her mother had made a homemade cake that leaned slightly to one side. They sang happy birthday and the girl blew out her candles in a single breath, like she'd been preparing. When she hugged me goodbye, she whispered thank you, and I had to blink hard to keep from crying in front of everyone. A week later, another envelope came, this one from the state prison where my husband was being held. His handwriting looked shaky, and the letter filled 3 pages with explanations about gambling debts and fear of the people he owed money to. He wrote about how Sophia had promised him fast cash and how he'd convinced himself nobody would be truly hurt. I read it once, standing by my mailbox, then walked to the dumpster and dropped it in without responding. Trial dates kept shifting, but finally, 6 months after that day at the mall, the sentences came down. Sophia received 8 years with parole eligibility at 5. My husband received his plea deal terms of 15 years. The girl and her mother had settled into their own apartment by then, supported by victim services and a nonprofit that helped crime survivors rebuild. The mother was working full hours at the security company and had even received a small raise after her supervisor took note of how dependable she was. I was working 2 jobs myself, cashier at Target during the day, and stocking shelves at a grocery store 3 nights a week. My back ached constantly and I'd catch myself dozing standing up sometimes, but the bills were being covered without his income. The girl sent me photos occasionally, school projects, the cat they'd adopted from the shelter. Her grades had climbed to mostly B's now that she wasn't living in constant fear. Detective Griffith stopped by the Target where I worked one afternoon to check in and mentioned 2 more members of the fake cop network had been arrested. Most of the operation was in custody, though he admitted a couple were likely abroad somewhere beyond reach. He gave me his card again and said to call if I ever felt unsafe, but nothing unusual had happened since the trials wrapped up. 8 months after everything, I met someone at my second job who made me laugh for the first time in longer than I could account for. He already knew my full story because the workplace gossip had gotten there first, but he didn't treat me like I was fragile or contaminated. We went for coffee after a shift one night and he listened without trying to fix anything as I filled in the parts the gossip had gotten wrong. He had his own messy divorce behind him and understood without explanation why I flinched when someone came up behind me too fast. We moved slowly and he never pushed when I said I needed space. The girl's mother called me one day to say she'd been promoted to full-time supervisor at the security company, benefits included. Her voice carried something I hadn't heard in it before, a quiet steadiness. She invited me over to see the apartment now that they'd really settled in. The girl had her own room with Pokemon posters and a desk where she did her homework every evening without being reminded. She showed me a certificate she'd won for a school writing competition. Her essay was about what real courage actually means. It was about her mother teaching her to notice details and stay sharp when you're frightened, and about how sometimes bravery looks like asking a stranger for help in a mall bathroom. We all carried marks that would probably never fully fade, but we were constructing something new from what remained. Thanks for letting me wonder right alongside you through all of this. Until next time, like the video, it helps more than you think.